This occurred in the late 2000s, I believe around 2007 or 2008. I think I was around 6 or 7 years old around that time. Probably 6.5 because my mom told me about half birthdays around then. And I remember really wanting a Peter Pan themed one. I was a Girl Scout, Brownie. I'd just gotten out of the Daisy level of Girl Scout in the Washington, Oregon, Montana area. And they did a cool thing every summer for 2 weeks at a time. I was super excited, mostly because the only thing Daisies had done was stay after school to talk and make arts and crafts. You had to be a brownie, minimum, to be able to go. For 2 weeks every summer, a bus system would go around to a bunch of small towns in the area and round up Girl Scouts at 7 in the morning and then drop them back home at 7 at night. It took 2 hours to drive to the campground this was situated in. It was a really obscure campground, with a single road in and out. There were forests for miles and miles in every direction, except for south, which was where the road led in. If you drove about an hour south, you'd see farms and then the small town I lived in. The campground itself was a huge field, with a lodge in the middle. The lodge was 2 stories and old, but just barely big enough to fit a small gift shop run by a nice old Native American lady, a mess hall, and a huge kitchen. A staircase led to a balcony that went all around and faced down into the mess hall. There were a bunch of beds up there. I remember because I snuck up there once to see what it was for Girl Scouts to stay the night. Now, an important thing that led to my encounter was that I desperately wanted to stay the night. At least once. I may have been 6, but I thought it would be awful cool to stay in the bunks with all the other older girls, and even some of the few privileged brownies who could stay. Around the huge field were trails scattered to what we called stations. Every mile or so, a small campground would come into view. Each small troop of Girl Scouts, sorted by age, level, town, and then school, would have a station to themselves as a waypoint to relax, gimp, and gather after nature hikes. Every 2 miles or so was a porta potty, like the ones you would see in the Wild West film. I remember my station was one of the nicer ones, and we had a small troop. The station itself was within 20 feet of a porta potty, which we decorated with "Stay Out" signs so no one would use it. It was our porta potty, that's for sure. It also had a sturdy wooden rain cover over the picnic table, a fire pit, though we only used it once, and a small dirt clearing that we played Duck Duck Goose in. The girls in my group were Emily, my next door neighbor, and we were best friends at the time, Samantha, Alice, Lizzie, and then Princess. Our group leader was Miss Belinda, a really chill senior. Most of the day, we would hike around looking for trails and plants and sometimes even making flower necklaces from wildflowers in the field. At least ones that hadn't been cut by a lawnmower a few weeks before. And gimping. Gimping was really important to us, and I feel it is relatively important to the story as well. Gimping was more known to us as weaving, not the computer program. We would go to the lodge every day, and depending on how many points we earned from our hikes and activities, we could buy a color or two as a group and weave these little strips for our backpacks. Each day, a single troop did the same pattern and colors, which helped keep track of everyone, and if someone lost a gimp, it could easily be returned. The more gimp you had in your backpack, the more authority you had. Now, there used to be a guy who would walk around and check on the groups every once in a while. He was super nice, and he always wore these dark black hiking shoes, white socks, shorts, and his army green backpack. It was covered in gimp, so everyone looked up to him and respected him. I think he was a park ranger or something, but I don't remember seeing his badge. He was really nice, and everyone trusted him. If he wasn't a park ranger, He must have been a frequent camper or a scout's grandpa or dad. Okay, that's pretty much all of the important details out of the way. So, one day, at the end of the first week, I am begging and begging and begging to my mom to let me stay. Looking back at it, I feel really bad. She was working a part-time job and taking care of me and my 2-year-old brother. My dad was on his second mission in Iraq, which made her even more stressed. He's fine though. Finally, once my mom heard that Emily's mom was giving in, she allowed me to go under the condition that I made sure to brush my teeth and put on a lot of bug spray. I very happily agreed and rushed off to my room to pack everything as soon as possible. The next morning, with envelopes in hand, me and Emily got on the bus and very happily sang a song about a skeeter playing football on the wall. When we arrived, we were jumping around Miss Belinda like monkeys. She seemed happy for us and showed the envelopes to the old lady at the gift shop. The old lady smiled at us, and we got to choose our own GIMP colors to work on that afternoon while we waited for our bunks. She then led us upstairs to where some older girls were cleaning up their bunks, and we got to choose ours. Nevertheless, we were really excited. That night, after all the kids who weren't staying left, we all went out with 4 other group leaders and the GIMP guy. We were each sorted into groups of 3. I was with Emily and a cadet named Jesse, and were told that we were going to play some version of hide and seek. We were each given maps of the area, flashlights, and glow sticks. I think that if we were tagged, we had to go back to the field and wait until the horn was sounded. The last team standing won. Afterwards, we were going to have a huge fire and roast s'mores. That sounded good to us, and we all split up. We led Jesse to our station, but after we realized it was much too crowded, we slipped out and started going further. We planned on hiding in Jesse's station. It was farther out and would be much harder to find, so we were fine with it. The GIMP guy and the other leaders were supposed to be monitoring the edge of the campground. Halfway into the game, it started getting dark. This was when we arrived at Jesse's camp. Me and Emily were getting kind of scared at this point, so we stayed close to her and sat at the picnic table while she showed us how to GIMP a swirly design. We were set on sitting everyone else out. By the time it was dark enough that we had to turn our flashlights on, I could see Jessie was getting a bit nervous. She was a bit pale, which made me and Emily super quiet all of a sudden. We had been out there for an hour, maybe an hour and a half. "Is a group coming?" Emily asked. Jessie shushed us both and looked out into the woods with her flashlight. We all sat, pretty stiff for a good 10 minutes. Me and Emily stopped gimping and looked around too, ready to spring up and bolt if a group came out of the bushes. That was when we heard a growling sound. It was low, and if we had been talking, we wouldn't have heard it. I felt my little heart start beating fast. Is it a cougar?" I asked softly, looking at Jessie. "Shh," she whispered. "If it is, I need you guys to start screaming and hold out your arms, okay?" We both nodded, now thoroughly scared. We all jumped and squeaked when we saw movement, and I remember dropping my GIMP. I quickly leaned down to pick it up. That's when I heard Jessie gasp. I quickly looked up and froze. It was huge. It looked like a bear, but it stood on its back legs like a weird-looking deer. Its face looked vaguely human, and it looked like its mouth had been ripped open. Its face was covered in blood. It had a longish neck, thick shoulders, and looked deathly skinny. I could barely make out tiny horns poking out from scraggly brown hair. Its hair was falling out in clumps. Its arms were much too long, its knees bent. It looked kind of like it had paws, but I couldn't see that well because Jessie kept the flashlight pointed at its face. There were 2 things that scared me about it the most, though, as if I wasn't already terrified enough. Its eyes were a milky white color, and in its bloody claws were the Gimp Man's bag. He never took that bag off. Never. We stared at each other for what felt like ages, and I realized that it wasn't growling. It was breathing. It sounded like it had a frog in its throat, but it physically couldn't cough. When it stepped forward, Jessie screamed and pushed us under the picnic table. We both started screaming too as she practically covered us with her body, throwing the flashlight out first, attempting to hit it as it started trying to claw away at the concrete table. Then, she threw the glow sticks and whatever else she could scrounge in our hiking bags. Books, first aid kits, gimp balls, rocks, bags of food, anything. It's really hard for me to think about all this because it was just terrifying. Most kids are scared of something under their bed, but having something like this throw itself at you from the far reaches of a forest you had once thought safe, in the middle of nowhere, it's a whole different nightmare. It was making a broken, crackled wailing or howling sound every few minutes before grunting and growling and heavily breathing as it tried to squeeze its claws and head under the table, or through the holes of the seats, or even through the holes of concrete that had been chipped out of the table. We were all still screaming too. And that was when it stopped. We all went deathly quiet, and I peeked out past Jessie's arm and saw it raise its head before looking around and marching around the table. It looked at the table every once in a while, and by now we were all just crying and covering our mouths to stay quiet. It paused and looked back. I can still see its eyes. Just thinking about it makes me pause and shudder. Suddenly, it bounded toward the table and over it, almost like a dog. But when it landed again on the other side, it took off on two legs, and then on both its arms and legs, and then on just its legs again. We waited there for an hour in pitch blackness under that picnic table until an ambassador found us. We were all shaking and crying and trying to explain. Even though Jessie was 13 years old, she was terrified. And that just scared us more. We were rushed back to the lodge, and we didn't do the fire pit that night. I didn't see Jessie again after that, but I heard some seniors talking about a bear attack or something, and that her back was all messed up. Me and Emily curled up on the bottom bunk under the sheets. We went home the next day, and apparently everything had already been explained to worried parents. I remember before I got on the bus, a real park ranger looking guy pulled both me and Emily aside to talk about the bear. We tried to tell him that it was not a bear. It was definitely not a bear. But he didn't seem to believe us. He asked us about the Gimp Man too, and held up a picture, asking if we'd seen him or anything to do with him. We told him we had seen him yesterday night, and that the bear had been holding his bag. We told him about where Jessie's camp was, and we both got stickers and were ushered onto the bus. To this day, I'm really thankful to Jessie. If it weren't for her quick thinking, we could have died in those woods that night. I haven't heard about the Gimp Man since either. I don't know if he's alive or not, and I haven't been back to that camp since. I now live in Canada. Far, far away.